Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back to school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio for a special pop-up show and interview with former Schools Minister Nick Gibb. We can't wait to have this conversation. It's going to be really fascinating. We're going to be looking at the period in education from 2010 to 2024. So much happened. And what better a person to talk to than one of the longest serving schools ministers, Nick. So we'll bring Nick on in just a moment. Before we do that, welcome to you. If you want to get involved in this conversation live, of course you can. You can comment on LinkedIn. You can comment on YouTube. You can comment on X. You can tag us in wherever you want. And we will maybe, if you have a question, we might throw it up on screen. If you have a comment to make, post it in. We love to hear from teachers. We love to hear from people in education about what they think. That's really why we're here. So, yeah. The other thing I want to do, obviously, before we start is mention our wonderful sponsors on the show this evening, Hachette Learning. If you haven't heard of Hachette Learning, formerly John Catt Educational, you can head over to the Hachette Learning website and you can have a browse, have a look at all the different titles that they have on there and get yourself one. School year's about to start soon. There's nothing you can't get on that website. So head over there, search a title, search a topic, see what you can find. Dig into it. More than anything, really appreciate Hachette Learning for supporting everything we do at Teachers Talk Radio. So, yeah, there's a few other things I'll mention as the show goes on. But without further ado, let me bring on my wonderful co-host, Dave Brown, and Nick Gibb. Good evening, both.
Good evening.
Cool. Hello, Tom.
How are you doing? All right?
Yeah, good. This is my last day of the holiday, back at work tomorrow, so I can't think of a better end to the holiday than chatting with you and Nick tonight.
Brilliant. And Nick, how are you doing? All right?
Very well, thank you. Yes, looking forward to our discussion. Yep.
Superb. Well, if there's anything I've missed there, Nick, in my introduction, then feel there's so much that you do. I know you're traveling the world, talking about the work you did in Parliament and the work you've done in education. I know you've got a book as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to add into the introduction about author, speaker, politician, sports person. We could be adding anything in here.
Well, I run every day, but that's as much as a sports person I am. The book is called Reforming Lessons, and it's essentially the what and the why of our education reforms from those years you mentioned, 2010 to 2024. Actually, it goes back prior to that to talk about the years in opposition when we were preparing. Michael Gove and I were preparing. I was 5 years as a shadow schools minister, and then 10 years between 2010 and 2023. And for the mathematicians among you, you'll see that is 13 years. So there were a couple of periods when I was out of office for various political reasons. And it's also the book talks about the controversies and the battles we had to wage during that period as well. And it explains the sort of the philosophy behind, the knowledge-rich curriculum, phonics, East Asian maths, the behavior policies, and some of the key figures who played an absolutely vital role in implementing these reforms.
We've got some quick fire questions to start, Nick, if that's all right. So what I want to ask first, and I'll hand over to Dave in a second after this first little question from me. Your favourite Prime Minister that you worked for?
Oh, David Cameron. I mean, if you hadn't have said worked for, I'd have said Mrs. Thatcher, which kind of pigeonholes me politically with your listeners.
Wow.
I don't know if that's a good
But
thing.
why is that? Why was she?
Oh, she just transformed Britain from the basket case that it was in the 70s. Because you were much younger, both of you, than me. So I came of age. I was in my teens in the 70s, and the country was so different from what it is today, economically, in every way. And but of the prime ministers that I worked for, David Cameron, I mean, I was almost going to say in the intro that without him, our reforms would not have happened. You cannot implement the scale of reform in any department, but particularly education, without the full support and understanding of the prime minister. And although David Cameron was only shadow education secretary for about 6 months before he then became leader, he did understand. He's a very bright man, and he really understood the philosophical challenges, the ideology we were trying to challenge, the orthodoxies that we were trying to challenge in the education system that led to its decline. And he understood all that. And so when Michael Gove and I were sort of encountering, these might be quick questions, aren't they? Sorry. You interrupt, otherwise I'll just take up the whole time. You won't get a
It's interesting. Go on.
But the things that Michael Gove and I did were controversial, and so it uses up political capital, and without the prime minister's full support, you just don't have enough bandwidth to continue the process. But we had it fully with him for those 6 years he was prime minister.
Well, I wanted to ask as well, Nick, in terms of education secretaries, if you had to pick one of those, right, who you felt, and I'm not going to say the best and favourite, because that's a little bit, whatever. But I wanted to ask, out of those, the one that you felt understood education the most, or at least had that sort of, in your opinion, that understanding of education the best.
These questions aren't very difficult, Tom. So the answer to this one is, there's just no doubt. It's Michael Gove. I mean, Michael was shadow education secretary for 3 years while I was shadow schools minister. In that period, he was there 2007 to 10, and then he was minister, secretary of state from 2010 to 2014. And together we drove the reforms. But Michael was the driving force behind all this. Without Michael as Secretary of State, none of this would have happened. So there's no question that my answer to your second quick question is Michael Gove.
Well, trust me, Nick, the questions are going to get more complex and challenging. I promise you they are, because I've got Dave with me, who I'm going to pass over to now. We got way better questions than that, but that was just my little, that was my start.
They're really good questions, but they're just not, the answers to both, in my own mind, are so clear. David Cameron was the best prime minister. I mean, not just in education. I actually think he's an underrated prime minister. Do
you not think? Again, can I just, before we get into the education, and I didn't want to bring this up, but I will. You see,
you're going to bring up Brexit. I know you are.
Yeah, I can't get past it, Nick. I can't. It's my problem, I know, and I probably need therapy for it. But I really, because I get it. I get what you're saying, but I don't know. My opinion, it tarnished the whole thing.
Well, he was a Remainer. Don't forget, David Cameron wanted Britain to stay in the European Union. He campaigned very hard to keep Britain in the European Union, but he lost the referendum. We live in a democracy, and then you're going to say, well, why did he hold a referendum? What on earth possessed him to hold a referendum? There was no choice. He had no choice. The forces within the centre right of politics, not just in Parliament, but in the country. The emergence of the UK Independence Party, it wasn't just a thing to deal with. It was a reflection of a large portion of public opinion in the country, and he simply would not have survived. The party could not have survived in government, in my judgment. A lot of people share your view about this. Had he not promised a referendum and then delivered a referendum? And I mean, I've fought, I think, nine parliamentary elections, and on the doorstep leading up to the 2015 election, where it was promised, people were furious about not having a referendum on some of the treaties, I think the Amsterdam Treaty, and they were skeptical about whether the Prime Minister would go ahead and hold the referendum that he'd promised, and they were kind of getting ready to be cross if he hadn't done so. So I think he had no choice but to hold that referendum, and people should have campaigned harder.
Nick, this is a great time for me to hand over to Dave for some more questions.
Jump back into education. It just got me thinking when you were talking about your long career. If we go on the way back machine and go back to the 90s, my question is, if you look at the Blair government, you obviously have very strong views about education. You're very passionate about it. You worked with Michael Gove for a long time. But is there anything from the Blair government and even into Gordon Brown that you think, oh, yeah, they got that right? Or were you guys just totally against everything they did in terms of education?
No, totally the opposite. We were great supporters of what Tony Blair, this Prime Minister, was seeking to do, and Andrew Adonis, actually. So he had a 2005, it's all in the book, by the way, Reforming Lessons. And it was the 2005 white paper was a sort of, it brought in the kind of things on autonomy for schools that we then did implement in office. And actually, it was our support, the Conservative support. Another great thing that David Cameron did when he was leader of the opposition. He was leader of the opposition for 5 years, 2005 to 10, in opposition to Tony Blair and then Gordon Brown as prime ministers. But there was a bill, the Education and Inspections Bill, that had a lot of opposition from Labour MPs when it was published, and it would not have got through onto the statute book had the Conservatives not voted for it. It was a very controversial bill. We agreed with most of it. A lot of Labour MPs did not agree with some of it, and they were rebelling against it. But David Cameron's great leadership, he made us vote for it, and I was very happy to vote for it. And then it became law because of us. The other thing that we took on was Andrew Adonis. He pioneered the Academies program. So when we came into office in 2010, there were 203 academies. They were all failing schools that had been taken away from local authorities to improve them, sort them out. We then took that program and we said any good school could become an academy, and underperforming schools could become a sponsored academy. And now there are over 10,000 academies, and 83% of secondary schools are now academies and 43% of primaries. But that all came from the previous Blair Brown Labour government.
So what would you say in your time that you were minister, what would be your biggest regret at the end of the Conservatives' time in power, and your time at the end of an MP and as a minister, that you would say, like, you can have lots of regrets, but one that you would take responsibility for? Is there anything you would say at the end of this time that you regret not changing, or you feel was unfinished, or you made mistakes on?
I've always thought that could have done even more on it. I remember Laura McInerney asking me this question, and I basically disappointed her because I said I wish I'd done more. She said, "What, you'd be more Gibbite?" I said, "Yes." There were compromises we made when we introduced the curriculum that, in hindsight, if I'd known then what I know now, and all that experience I'd gained about education in those periods, I wouldn't have made those compromises. So that's probably a key thing. I wish I'd had more time. I'd like to have done some work in sport. I'm not sure that children play enough sport in state schools in England. We tried, but I think it needed probably a fundamental overhaul. So those are two of the things I wish we could have done better.
Can I just dig into that curriculum part? Can you give a specific example that you would say? Yeah,
so we might come across it, to this issue again. There's a kind of skills versus knowledge debate in the terms of the curriculum. So in your subject, history, there's teaching young people to act like a historian, to understand evidence and sources, and that there can be bias in who writes the history, that kind of stuff. And there's still some of that in the history curriculum. And then in science, there's teaching children to work scientifically. That's even in the primary science curriculum. So what happens with teaching, children to work scientifically is a lot of time is spent with 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds to have to conduct an experiment and write up the results and draw conclusions, which is too young, frankly, for that age group. I think that's a kind of skill that comes later in an academic life. once you've acquired quite a lot of knowledge of the subject. And the same in history. I think what we don't, I just think how many people leave our school system to become historians. It's 0.0001%. What we want from our education system is we want children to understand the complexities of history, the story of history, and then they'll understand why we are where we are in this country and the world. And we want them to be able to read history books and praise them. And these are challenging things to read, history books, compared with Michael Morpurgo. So those are this, and we want them to be able to write in a kind of technical way. We don't necessarily need them to become little mini archaeologists at 12. So that's the debate. And I mean, it goes into, you can go into this in greater detail. So you talk about 21st century skills. So creativity, problem solving, critical thinking. Can you teach those skills directly? And what we just learned from people like Daniel Willingham in his book, Why Don't Students Like School, is, and E.D. Hirsch in his book that had a massive influence on me. I read it on the beach in 2006 when we were in opposition, and it influenced everything we did then from then on in government. But he believes in knowledge, and he says that if you want those skills I've just described, you don't get them from teaching them directly. You get them from having a lot of knowledge. And so a problem solver who knows a lot of maths and science, critical thinkers who know a lot of humanities, creativity, if you know a lot of great music and art and literature, that's how you become creative. And what Willingham says is that the working memory is very small, and that's where the critical thinking and problem solving happens. And it can only hold about 6 new pieces of information. So if I gave you 2 phone numbers, you could probably recite them back. If I gave you 35 phone numbers and said, please recite them straight back, there's no chance you could do that. But if you think about the working memory, it needs more than 6 pieces of information to critically think about something. You need to know thousands, tens of thousands of bits of information that you accumulate over your lifetime. And so what Willingham says is that an education system is about getting knowledge into long-term memory.
Yeah.
And so that's what this debate is all about. And we might, and that,
yeah,
that
I mean,
drove.
I think that's interesting. I mean, at the moment, I actually agree with a lot of what you say, but at the moment, you would know, you say, you've looked at other education systems. English students sit over their entire, time as a student going up to A-level. They sit more exams in terms of hours than any other country than Singapore. Now, I guess my question would be, is that the aim? Is that just the best system that we can possibly come up with? I agree with your overall philosophy in terms of education. I'm just not sure, when you look at your time as minister and what happened with the changes, is that just, I don't know, what do you think of that statistic? Is that just what the best system we have and no one's come up with anything better than that?
Well, A, it's not true.
Okay.
So your next guest on this program should be Tim Oates, formerly of Cambridge Assessment, who say this figure is bandied about. It's just not true.
Yeah.
It might have been true before 2010, because prior to 2010, we had a modular GCSE system and we had a modular A-level system. And what was happening was that young people would take a module and they sit their first exam almost like in the January of their lower 6th, year 12. They'd be taking their first module and then they'd forget everything they'd learned. And then if they didn't get the grade, they'd retake it. And that was happening in GCSE over and over again. People were retaking modules, they were banking grades. We got rid of that. No, we said, it's all going to be synoptic at the end of the 2 years. No exams for 2 years. Then you do your exams from what you've remembered and what you've learned. The only other exam that a secondary school child, well, in fact, that's it. They can go from year 7 to year 10, and the only exams, external public exams, qualifications they will take, will be in year 11, at the end of 5 years of secondary education. Now, there should be internal tests, of course, regularly. Children should be regularly tested, because retrieval practice is a way of ensuring that children can remember what they learned. And it is important that children remember what they learned. That's because it goes back to the critical thinking. If you can't remember anything, you won't be able to critically think about those things. You cannot keep looking up in Google and AI what 7 6s are, what the boiling point of water is. You just need to know these things.
Yeah.
So you need to remember. So those kind of internal, non-high stakes tests are really important for memory. But internal exams, there's the phonics screening check that I introduced for 6-year-olds. There is the SATs at age 11 in reading, writing, maths, and grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Nothing then until year 11. And that is not the case in a lot of other countries.
Yeah.
So
have you got any follow-up questions, Tom?
Not really. I mean, I don't necessarily have mega strong views on the exam system, other than I think it's the bit I have strong views on is when it becomes incredibly high stakes for teachers and school leaders linked to OFSTED, for example, and the way they go about things. In fact, I was going to, about 5 minutes ago, when you were talking about your biggest regrets, I was wondering whether one of your regrets might be what went down a few years ago and the way that panned out, and how, I wanted to, there's 2 parts, I guess, to that question. Is one, whether you regret anything during that period yourself, whether there's anything you feel, do you know what, me, Nick, I could have done that better, or I could have made a bigger influence on XYZ and made it better. I know you weren't in OFSTED, but obviously you were within the sphere of influence, if you like. And I guess the part 2 question is, what's come out of all of that now? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was the minister responsible for OFSTED, although they are an independent body. I was certainly responsible for it. And what happened in Caversham was just an appalling tragedy, just terrible. I can't imagine the anguish that head teacher Ruth Perry went through when she received her initial judgment of the school. It's important, though, that we do have an OFSTED. Don't forget, our education system has improved dramatically since 2010. Before 2010, we were going down in PISA. We were going down from 7th and 8th into the year 2000 in reading and maths to 25th and 27th in reading and maths by 2009, and we were kept going down and down. Today we've gone England. Those figures are UK. England has gone from 27th in maths in the year 2009 to 11th, and we are now 4th in the world in reading of 9-year-olds in the Pearls study, and we're going up in TIMSS as well. So in all those international studies, we are now rising, and we will, and I believe we'll continue to rise even under this current government. So how do we achieve that? Well, all the changes to the way reading is taught, phonics, the East Asian maths that we introduced in teaching arithmetic and mathematics in primary, and then into secondary, and then the knowledge-rich curriculum. But we also gave autonomy to teachers through the Academies program. And you can't have autonomy without strong accountability.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk picture books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
So it is important to have a strong accountability for both those performance tables and the inspections. And but I think what happened with Ofsted was that, I mean, this Caversham was a very good school academically. There's no question. If you look at their results, before that inspection and afterwards, they're very high academically. They had a problem there with their safeguarding, and safeguarding is regarded as probably the most important aspect of the oversight of schools. You cannot have, even if the safeguarding itself is fine, but the procedures have to be fine as well, because if you have weak procedures, then something bad could happen in due course. So the procedures were not good enough in Caversham, and that's why she got the grade that she got. What Amanda Spielman then did as a consequence of that was that she made changes so that if a school failed because of safeguarding, they were given an opportunity to put it right within a very short period of time, because you can put safeguarding procedures right pretty quickly, whereas sometimes academic problems in the school can take longer. So I think it's a pity that those
put in there. Shouldn't that have been foreseen though in advance of things like this happening? Shouldn't that have been something where they'd have gone, hang on a minute, what if we go into a school and there's some sort of recording issue? Because that's, as far as I can tell, I understand it's safeguarding. It was a procedural issue, giving somebody an opportunity to go, we've just found this, right? Can you do X, Y, Z? Everything else is perfect. Can you do X, Y, Z to resolve it? Which is what happened after the event. All I'm saying is, could there have been it's a very high stakes system anyway. So, I remember, I don't know if this was still the case towards the end, but it's like if your leadership and management wasn't good, then nothing else could be good, or something along those lines, right? Stuff like that. And part of that's the one grade system, but just from what you've said, am I right in picking up, though, that you were sort of generally supportive of Amanda Spielman during that period, and how, what she did just after? And
yes, no, totally. I mean, we appointed her, and she was a brilliant Ofsted chief inspector. She was there for 7 years, and she changed the inspection framework so that it focused more on the curriculum, so that schools that were coasting and doing well, despite having a weak curriculum, they were held to account. So I think it was what I mean. The thing, you make it's a good question, and it's a challenging question, unlike your first two questions at the beginning of the program. I suppose, can you foresee every problem? I wish we could.
In my opinion, that's her job.
Yes, well, no, sure. I wish we had been able to anticipate this problem, and I'm sure Amanda does too. It is just because safeguarding is so important. I mean, imagine if I had said 2 or 3 years before Caversham, let's downgrade the importance of safeguarding. I would have been howled.
That's what no one has suggested that though.
No.
But what we're talking about is a procedural opportunity for somebody to correct a record-keeping or procedural error to save the entire reputation of a school leadership team, of a school community, of a set of because once you get that judgment, it's harder to attract teachers.
I agree with you, but the thing is, I just don't think anybody had anticipated this happening. There's another little angle to this issue that we mustn't forget, in that, and that's something perhaps we shouldn't have done. Maybe that is another regret. that when we came into office in 2010, we said if the school is outstanding, they won't have to be inspected. And the reason for that decision was to reward high performance. You're a great performing school. We're not going to bother you with all that pressure. Just get on with what you're doing. And we had a resource issue. We had a lot of schools that were underperforming. We wanted Ofsted to focus on those schools. And now we've gone from, the figures are like 68% of schools were good or outstanding in 2010. Now it's 86%. So if you think about 68%, that meant 32% of schools, a third, were either requires improvement or, in category 4, inadequate. So we wanted Ofsted to focus on those schools. But the consequence of that policy was that schools would go year after year after year. It came a point in, I think, about 2020. I can't remember when we changed the policy, 2021 maybe. They've been going for 10 years with no inspections. So had we been inspecting Caversham regularly because it was an outstanding school, so it was not inspected all this period, this thing would have been picked up a long time ago, and we wouldn't then have this sort of cliff edge issue. It would. So that's a side issue.
I mean, Amanda Spielman visited Caversham, as part of a test inspection. It wouldn't the same issue have happened whenever they were inspected?
Yes, probably, because it was outstanding, and but I think, I don't know. Maybe
I understand it. I know emotions are high and everything, but it was just when you were saying about, sort of that you were supportive of say Amanda Spielman, for example, and you're happy with what she did and all her achievements. That was the bit I picked up on. I thought the way, and this is only Tom talk, and this is my opinion.
Yeah.
If what had happened, and then you're sort of appearing on breakfast TV, podcasts, and whatever afterwards, and you're not showing, in my opinion, a heck of a lot of attrition. You've just, to be fair to you, you've just come on and said, you started off by sort of really painting a picture of how bad that was, right? I think there were a lot of people at the time who didn't really think that Amanda Spielman did that. And I think that's where a lot of stuff, I don't know whether you want to come in with a question on that, Dave, but that was my only point to you, Nick, is that where I'm a bit surprised you still supportive of her after that.
Well, there are two issues there. One is how she handled the tragedy, and that's not for me to comment on that. So it was a very, very challenging period to be chief inspector, and I wouldn't, it was a very difficult period for her and for the government on that issue. But did she do a good job in 7 years as chief inspector? She did. I mean, she contributed to standards rising, and so we shouldn't take that away from her because of what happened. And I know, and it was an absolute tragedy. It should not have happened, and I would do anything to help make it not happen. Have not happened. I can't imagine what the family, even now, is still going through.
But the work, Nick, there's been, to be fair, again, someone in the comments can quote me if I'm wrong on this, but I think there's been, unfortunately, 13, senior leaders, head teachers who have taken their lives, since 2010, directly linked in, there to Ofsted and that process. So I understand what you're saying on Caversham, but you were there from 2010, so you knew potentially the damage that those one-word judgments were doing. And, would there be people out there who might look at that and go, Nick didn't do anything until, on that until it was too late. And even then, it was the back end of, do you understand? I know that might sound
Look,
hard.
I do.
Look,
the accountability regime has to be there. We all have a boss, and we have to be held to account for spending public money and being responsible for the education of thousands of children. That people have to be held accountable for that if you hold a senior position as head teacher of a school, whether it's in the state sector or the independent sector. So there are pressures that come with seniority. There's no question whether it's in education or in business. There are pressures that come with the job, and and I don't think we added to that pressure. Ofsted existed prior to 2010. It was established by the 1988 Education Act, which was a conservative piece of legislation, Ken Baker. It was then kept in place throughout Tony Blair's period and Gordon Brown's, and then we kept it in place for the whole of our period of office. And it's an important part of accountability. And I say you can't have that autonomy. You can't give professionals autonomy of how they run their ship if you don't have accountability as well. Otherwise, standards will just decline.
I guess my question, just to jump in, Nick, is, again, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I've read your articles in the Telegraph. I guess the question I have, and which I don't quite understand, is you're very proud of, the improvements in the PISA scores, and rightfully so. And even if you go with Ofsted, what is the connection between one-word judgments and an improvement in exams? Surely, I know you've got concerns about what Labour's doing, but surely any Ofsted which sort of sets out how a school is progressing and is a bit more in depth than a snapshot that's outstanding, good, needs improvement. What do you see as the connection between having that particular Ofsted system that gives that snap judgment, which I think is Tom's concern, and rising PISA scores? Because I have trouble seeing it myself.
It is just about accountability. Look, 86% of schools are good or outstanding. So for 86%, there isn't an issue. So the other 14%, those schools, if you were to visit them, I think you'd be concerned about them, and you'd worry about sending your child to those schools. And we have to sort them out, and and help them improve. And that's what Ofsted helps us to achieve. And I mean, these are difficult judgments to make for Ofsted. They're only there for a short period of time. Experienced HMIs and practicing senior leaders in our education system go in and do the inspections. And we do need to make sure that it's as professionally run as possible, with all the empathy and support that is needed, of course, and they need to be accurate. And a series of chief inspectors, from Michael Wilshaw to Amanda to David Bell before Michael Wilshaw, all those people, Christine Gilbert, all tried to make sure that the inspection regime was as sophisticated and as accurate as it could be. But it has to be there, and no one's saying it can't be improved. Of course it can be improved, and we should always be trying to improve it. I just think, in terms of a one-word judgment, I think it needs to be something that parents and everyone can understand. And I think having 5 different categories can be confusing, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will serve to be as a clear form of accountability as one-word judgment. We will see. But Ofsted has been in place for a long time, since 10, 20, 30 years, over 30 years. And I think it has served the public well. We were a bit worried about Ofsted, I have to say, when we came into power in 2010. And it's something we hadn't spotted initially. And it was people like Andrew Smith, who was a blogger, old Andrew, who it was his dogged research into the reports that highlighted the fact that actually Ofsted were enforcing some non-evidence-led approaches to teaching, and actually causing damage to our systems. That we did sort that out in the end. We said there was no Ofsted style of teaching, and so we did sort that problem out.
The only thing is, though, Nick, I mean, if you looked at the recent stats on Ofsted, for example, 75% of school teachers and 82% of senior leaders said that inspections negatively impact their mental health and well-being. 73% believe that Ofsted were not fit for purpose. And the bit I wanted to ask you about, because the one thing we haven't mentioned in this first 40 minutes is 40,000 teachers. 40, in fact, let's take 2023, 43,500 leaving teaching. That's not, because teaching's a fantastic job. Nobody should, you know, myself and Dave have got nearly 40 years between us. We love it. It's great. But there shouldn't be that many people leaving if things were great.
Well, retention has been an issue that we've, and it's not just this country, by the way. You make it sound as if it's a peculiar thing to England, or it's global. I mean, I talk to ministers all over the world, and we all have the same issue. We both have an issue with recruitment, and all countries have the same issue with people leaving the profession. And so we tried everything we can to address this. We got rid of, we brought in much better marketing of the profession. That wasn't just about, say, please apply to be a teacher, here's the form. It was about conveying to the public how important teaching is as a profession, and trying to raise its status. Nothing, not saying come and earn X, Y, and Z. It was about trying to do that. That's what the marketing did, and it won awards, and it was very effective. We then wanted to make sure, why were 12% of graduates leaving teaching in the first year? And we tried to address that through the early career framework. I just felt we treated, I compared how a young graduate coming into teaching was treated in education compared to how a young graduate like me was treated when I started to be a chartered accountant with KPMG. We were given everything, all the support in our work. We weren't expected to sit up till midnight working out how to audit a company or do their accounts. We were trained and had a hand held by more senior people the whole way. Whereas with graduates in teaching, we sort of say, right, first job, first flat. Oh, by the way, you've got to create all your lesson plans for the next month, and you're up till midnight every night. And meanwhile, their friends who are at KPMG or in banking, they're not up to midnight every night doing all this stuff. So of course they leave. So we try to stop that by having the early career framework with a mentor and more time off timetable to try and help that. And that's early days. We only brought that in really into 2017-18. Another regret, I would wish we'd done that earlier. Frankly, we would have had more time. And so, you know, and ultimately recruitment is an issue. It's about pay. It's about conditions. We want one of the biggest. Oh, and workload. So when one of the other secretaries of state I worked with was Nikki Morgan, and she initiated a survey, because on the OECD average, before this work was done, English teachers were working 8 hours a week above the OECD average, but our teachers were teaching at the OECD average. So there's 8 hours gap. What were they doing in those 8 hours? And so we tried to find out, and what we found out from that survey, 40,000 teachers replied, was it was marking, this thing called dialogic marking, where you write on the paper, please use more capitals, and the pupil writes back, yes, miss, I will use more capitals. That takes masses of time, that kind of dialogic marking, and we don't know how effective it is anyway. B, data collection, massive industry. This is another thing. This is something that OFSTED did generate, and we put a stop to it. Lots of internal data to demonstrate to OFSTED that children were making progress. We stopped all that. And what was the other thing? Oh, written lesson plans. So we worked with the unions. I worked very closely with Kevin Courtney and Mary Bousted, and we did some videos together to try and stop this. We set up some working groups to try and stop this kind of thing happening. And it was relatively successful. We took 5 hours a week from the surveys that are done off that working week. So that was so we haven't sort of all the problems that you highlight. Absolutely, we know they exist, but we didn't just sit back thinking, oh well, never mind. We tried all these things: early career framework, workload, and so on, to try and to make life of a teacher better.
So I guess I mean my follow-up question would be, can you put your finger on why they haven't potentially had the impact you would have hoped for? Because it's clear that, I guess, you know, teaching is in trouble, recruitment's in trouble. My wife works in recruitment. It is very difficult. People are leaving the profession. You know, what would you have done further? Why do you think these aspects didn't have an impact that you can really, you know, put your finger on?
Well, I think the workload thing did have an impact. It did take 5 hours a week off workload, and I think it's too early to say whether the early career framework will help retention. It doesn't help recruitment, but I think it will help retention. But it's too soon yet to say. But again, I would point out that this is not just unique to this country. It is a global challenge, and one thing that hinders teacher recruitment is a strong economy. And I mean, even with the problems we're going through now in our economy, there's still great demand for the best graduates. Commerce wants them, banking wants them, industry wants them, and education wants them. And so we are competing with all those very attractive alternative career options for young people, the best people. And so the one way of dealing with that is to pay more. We employ 450,000 teachers in England, and I have always, as a minister, sought to push up the pay, because my objective is to get ever higher standards in our schools. That's the Treasury's objective is to make sure that we balance the books, or at least don't borrow more than we can get away with. And that's a challenge that this government will be facing now. They've got pressures on balancing the books. They've got pressures on finding more money for defence and so on, and to pay teachers in the public sector and other employees better. It's a great challenge for our country with low growth. So there are no simple answers, in public life. I think what you can do if you're a minister is to make sure, and I talk about this in the book. It's why the book's called Reforming Lessons, because it's not just about education, it's about lessons in reform. How do you go about reforming a public service? And we've got to have ministers who are immersed in their sector and in their subject, and then they can take on these challenges. If these challenges were easy, it would already been done by somebody else a few years ago. So inevitably, as a minister, you are trying to deal with the problems that have not been solved, whether it's housing, getting young people on the housing ladder, whether it's economic growth, or whether it's congestion in our cities, or whether it's trying to push up standards in our schools rather than seeing them decline. And we've achieved that to an extent, more to do. But you are right, if you can't get teachers into the classroom, that will eventually start declining.
The only issue is, sorry, I'll bring Dave back in a minute, but 2023, so I think that was nearly your final stint, let's say. 2023, NAS, UWT, the big survey, 2023, I think it was called the big question, big survey thingy, right? They surveyed their members, and 52% of their members said workload had increased significantly.
So they increased what? 52% said what? So I didn't quite.
52% of NAS members in 2023 said that their workload had increased significantly.
Yes, and that will have happened because of COVID. So the survey I was telling you about with the 5 hours knocked off, that was done. That isn't just us making up the number. That is done by surveys of teachers' diaries. There's it's called a diary survey or something like that, and it's very, very accurate. And it's what happened in COVID was that teachers had to work phenomenally hard, and I've always paid tribute to our teaching profession for the way they handled COVID, because contrary to popular belief, we did not close all our schools during COVID. They were almost all of them open, but not open to all children. They were open to children of critical workers, and they were open to children with who are vulnerable. And so they were open, and the teachers had to provide lessons online for the children that were not able to come into school due to COVID restrictions. So it was a phenomenally difficult time for teachers. So all that period, from when COVID started, to February 2020 through to at least 2022, they were working phenomenal hours and working very hard. And I don't think we've really recovered from that totally, because teachers are spending a lot of time trying to help children catch up from their lost time in because you never, I mean, children just didn't learn as well online as they do in the classroom, and they said they are recovering from that. So I absolutely accept what you say, that the workload of teachers has increased now. But I think once we get properly back to normal, I'm hoping that the things that drove that excessive workload, like the dialogic marking and their over obsession with data and the written lesson plans, all driven, going back to earlier discussion, by Ofsted. I don't think that will come back, and I hope it won't come back.
Just before Dave comes back in, massive thanks to Hachette Learning for supporting the show this evening. They're publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. If you want to check it out, visit Hachette Learning, their website. Grab yourself any CPD title you want on there. And Dave, passing back over to you.
Yeah, I wanted to spend the last bit of the show talking about academies. It's obviously something you're very proud of. Would you say that's your biggest achievement, or the thing that you think is the biggest driver, before I get into my questions about it, that you see as the biggest driver of the improvements that you can see happened under yourself and Michael Gove?
Actually, it's not, although I'm a massive supporter of academies. I think initially and I talk about it in the book, in opposition, we had a debate. I was very much on the standards side of this agenda. I believed in the phonics and the curriculum and all this stuff and teaching methods. And Michael really believed in, he learned a lot from what happened in America with the charter school movement, and really believed that giving professionals autonomy to do the things, and we had already had examples of King Solomon Academy and Osborne, who were really doing great things because they had that autonomy that the Labour government had given them, and we learned from King Solomon. And so he was really driven by that. And I talk about it in the book about the academies that really went wrong. Some academies, some schools were converted to academy, and they used their autonomy, and it was a disaster. I mean, at least large multi-academy trusts like EACT and that were just not delivering. However, I came to the view pretty soon that it's all very well my coming up with this stuff about phonics and learning multiplication tables and East Asian maths. If the schools were being told by the local authorities, you can't do that. I remember visiting a school in my constituency when I was a new MP, and I asked the primary school head whether the school taught multiplication tables, and she said that they do not, but that she would ask West Sussex County Council if she could. And I was kind of appalled by that. Here's a teacher of 20 years experience asking permission from some anonymous people in County Hall whether she could do what her professional judgment says she thought she should do. So that's what I feared would happen if we had all my stuff on standards. Then it would be, and then alternatively, of course, if you gave schools autonomy, why wouldn't they just continue doing the same old stuff that was not working? So you needed both. You needed the drive from the center about evidence-led approach to education, and you needed schools to have the autonomy to be able to deliver what they felt was important.
Yeah. So in terms of that autonomy, I know you've given examples of schools and free schools that you think have done a brilliant job that other schools should look at. But I've worked with teachers in multi-academy trusts. Let's say some of these are 200 schools, and they've had the same problem that you just described. When they've said they've had difficulties and they want to try something different in the history teaching, and I've suggested things, they've said, oh no, I have to talk to the head of the academy. Across all these academies, we have to teach the same lesson in the same way, with the same starters, with the same PowerPoints that are branded. So haven't those systems just replaced the local authority with an academy system that is no different? That can't be the autonomy that you sort of had in your mind when you and Michael set out to achieve this.
But most academies are not 200. I think the biggest is United Learning. I think they have about 100 or 90 or something. But most are about 30. No, the larger ones are about 30 or 40. Most are about 10 or 15. And the idea is that that history teacher would say, look, I've got this great idea. I think we should teach the Romans in this other way. Then you can discuss it with all the other history teachers. And they'll say, well, why don't you just try it with year 8? and then we'll see. And then they'll say, no, actually, it's not worked. The kids are bored. They're not learning anything. So we're not going to do that. Or it's brilliant. Let's now take your approach to teaching history in year 8, and we will spread it across the whole system. Why would we want a second-rate year 3 history lesson on the Romans when we could have your one, which is just so much better than anything we were doing before? That's the essence of it. And what it is, it's professionals. You know, if you were in a law firm, you know, you'd have to do things the way that the law firm says you do things. But also, if you're a really, good lawyer, you would say, look, and that's what happened at KPMG. You do things the way the firm has developed. But if you think you can do it better, you as professionals will discuss it amongst other professionals. Say, look, we should do this in this other way. And that's what's happening now in multi-academy trust. That it's not just the chief executive and the trust board saying, do it this way or else you're out. It's the professionals themselves who are saying, this is how you teach reading. We're going to use this reading scheme, and we just think it worked. Or they might say, we don't like this reading scheme. It's the professionals who are deciding, as opposed to people in County Hall who generally are part of a national, if you like, network of educationalists who really do adhere to one particular ideology. And there's an academic in America called Bob, surname's just gone out of my head for a minute then, who talks about the paradigm cartel. And it basically says that in any area of expertise, one view tends to dominate. And that's what was happening in British education.
Well, I've got to interrupt you, Nick, because I'm going to have to slightly disagree with you. Maybe I exaggerate how large these trusts are, but I know trusts across the UK, I'm not going to name any of them, that aren't following that model. That when I talk to a young teacher who says, oh, I'd love to experiment, I'm told no. And it's so set. The first part of the lesson must, be a starter. You must ask these questions. After 5 minutes, you do this. They've got branded PowerPoints. The lessons are very set. They come top down, making change. It's not all these individuals discussing.
No, but
what you've described is a great thing.
There's a difference, though. That what you're describing is based on the evidence of what works. So the profession has to be a mature profession that has to be based on what the evidence says is the most effective way. And now we know so much more through cognitive science about how children learn. So what you can't have in any profession is a young doctor coming in and saying, oh, look, you've told me to cut open this, do the surgery with this way. I want to do it in a different way. Let me try it. You can't have that, because all the evidence is that if you do it that other way, the patient will die. So the teaching profession is moving now into where the medical profession is, that there's so much evidence about retrieval practice and direct instruction and all these things. So of course, a young teacher coming into the profession will want to learn from more experienced professionals. They want to learn from what the evidence says is the most effective way. And what's happening with these larger multi-academy trusts is that they've got a very effective back office with very clever people who are immersed in the evidence. And there are all these conferences now taking place, Research Ed and so on, where this evidence is all discussed and debated. And so you have autonomy, but you also have to make sure that you are sticking to what the evidence says is the most effective approach. And that is why this country now is doing so well. And what's happening I'm just thinking, here you are with your own radio show about these things. There are scores and scores of podcasts coming out of this country by teachers who want to discuss pedagogy and curriculum. There are people that blog and write, and they attend these conferences, as I said, Research Ed and so on. That didn't used to happen. I mean, some of it is social media, no question, but some of it is driven by the fact that they have autonomy now in their schools. They are not part of this top-down education system, the education establishment forcing schools to comply with an ideology that the evidence says doesn't even work. Now they can have these debates and discussions. They really can. And that young teacher you're talking about, as they become more experienced, they will be able to influence what happens in that trust.
I'm not so, I agree in principle with what you're saying. And I think, the overall idea, I see the autonomy. I guess where I see it and where other teachers see it is these large academy trusts where I keep coming back to it, the same PowerPoints, they're branded, they have to teach in a certain way, to the minute, in a certain style. I'm not saying that this young teacher should go and rip it all up and totally experiment something wild. And I think everybody would agree with research based. I'm just wondering, when you see academy trusts that do have a very, very strict way of presenting lessons across a large trust with exactly the same PowerPoints that are branded, is that really autonomy? Has that taken your ideas about academies and pushed them to something that you would feel uncomfortable with?
Yes, this is what we envisaged. In fact, they've gone beyond anything we could have envisaged. It's so much better than we thought. If you go to West London Free School and you see the sort of the knowledge stuff that come out, the curriculum content they're selling to about 400 or 500 other primary schools, it is such high quality. And so what we wanted to do is to give schools autonomy so that they could become more professional and that they could adopt what the evidence says works. And whereas this was not happening from the local authorities. And that's what's great about it. And it does mean that if you're part of a professional team, you do things in the best way. And if that particular trust thinks that, I mean, these things, the thing about the what you described, the minute by minute lesson, the PowerPoint, I didn't write that stuff. Nor did any local government official.
No.
That material was written by professionals. That's what I mean by autonomy. Professionals wrote that material because they know, they have convinced themselves, or the evidence says, that that is the best way of making sure that children in that school really know their history or really know their science when they come out of lessons. So I think it is a different kind of autonomy, if you like, from. And the other thing about those kind of pre-prepared, it means that the young teacher isn't spending till midnight searching Google for materials to teach, which is a dreadful way of finding lesson plans. Far better to have material that has been honed over the years by really experienced teachers for you. Then your expertise is in making sure that Johnny on the fourth row or the kid at the back are actually paying attention to what you're saying and not drifting away and dreaming about other things. So that's where the real magic of being a teacher comes in. You don't have to spend hundreds of hours creating the material you're trying to teach.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
I think I sort of get where Dave's coming from, though, Nick, in the sense that the art of lesson planning, right? I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, when I came out of university, it was card sorts. It was, let's spend an hour making a card sort and let's really think about how to innovate within a lesson. Some of that was bad because you'd waste maybe a lot of time making something or trying to make something more jazzy or more fun. But also it did make you think about what you were actually doing and the student experience in that room. So, I get what Dave's saying in the sense there are schools out there now, and I'm not necessarily saying this wholly negatively in terms of the teacher and student experience in those schools. So let's be clear, I'm not. But what I am saying is, this is true, what Dave's saying, there is a system now of, right, you start as a teacher, if you go into one of these schools, it's like, this is good teaching. Here's a PowerPoint, run through this PowerPoint, run through the quiz in the PowerPoint, right? Do the PowerPoint, go through the content in the PowerPoint, do the review at the end of the PowerPoint. Bob's your uncle. That's great teaching. And in a lot of these schools, the behavior is at face value outstanding, because you've got lots of students sat there sort of facing the teacher, and they are compliant. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way, but they're compliant. But to sort, if you were in the sort of Halicon world of teaching, if you were going to say, what's the best thing I could do? You think of university seminars. You think of your experts sat there having, a sort of roundtable discussion and them sort of doing independent stuff and doing little projects. I'm sorry, that, in my opinion, that's the Halicon world. Now, I'm not silly. You can't do that with a lot of class, and this is where I would agree with you probably. You can't do that with a full class of 35 year 7s or 35 year 8s. You're going to hit problems pretty quick if you think you can do that there. But what I am saying is, from a lesson planning point of view, if you're going to go to a teacher and go, this is it. This is all you have to do. Plug this part, plug and play. It's plug and play, guys.
It's never plug and play, though, is it? Because you're dealing with 30 young people, 30 children, and it's how do you take this material that your peers, and by the way, as I said, it's your peers. This has not come from OFSTED. This has not come from the Department for Education or from a local authority. It's come from other teachers. So what you've got to do as a professional is to convey that, and that's the hard thing. This is the hard thing. How do you keep the attention of 30 children in that classroom so that they are concentrating and learning this material? And what's great about all this is that we're having this discussion, and these discussions are happening all over the country in different formats. I don't think this happened before. Not really. I think there was, and it's because of all these discussions. It may be that there's another school that does it slightly less prescriptively than what Dave was describing, and it's getting better results, or it's getting worse results.
Nick, from my perspective, it's not the resources that are the issue for me. So, for example, the Oak National Academy thing, I was quite a fan of that. I think it's good to have resources that are available to all teachers of high quality. That's not the bit. I think that's great. I think we need more of that, not less. Yeah. The bit that I'm talking about is if you take those and you, Nick Gibb, went into a school now, handed that to a new teacher, right, and said, I'm not saying it would be as simple as this, but said, if you just go through these, if you just run through, click the buttons on the panel, the behavior is going to be great for you because the vast majority of students are going to be compliant. They're going to
I think if you just click through it like that and read it out, not a single child in that classroom would learn a thing. Yeah. The reason why we have teachers, the reason why our first white paper, by the way, that came out in 2010 was called The Importance of Teaching. And I had a hand in the naming of that white paper because we believe in the importance of teachers, human beings, delivering the lessons. Now you can have all the kind of material given to you like. If you're not a professional teacher with the charisma and ability to convey this complex theory to these 13-year-olds who just don't want to be there because they want to play football, that is the genius of the teaching profession. And what we're saying is that having any kind of, first of all, it reduces workload if you have, whether it's Oak materials or you have the materials provided by the school. And B, this is the best way of teaching. That's what the teachers in that school have decided. And if you don't agree with it, there may be a different school that's better for you, or it may be that as you gain more experience, you can influence it and change it because you think actually there's a better way of teaching French irregular verbs than the way the school has developed. But I just think it's important that the teaching profession is a profession where evidence of what works trumps individual discretion about what and how you want to teach. That's what's happening in the teaching
Although,
profession
Nick,
in this country.
the great Dylan Willem, you know him, right?
He would agree with most of what I've been saying.
Would he, though?
Yes.
A quote from Dylan. I want to give you one of my favorite quotes from Dylan.
Right.
Classrooms are just too complicated for research ever to tell teachers what to do. Dylan Willem.
Well, except that I've been on shared platforms with Dylan around the world, including recently in Florida, and he does use evidence about assessment and whatever, or his specialisms, formative assessment and so on.
Yes.
So he is very evidence driven. He is right that classrooms are not petri dishes. They are full of, there are 30 children who are all different, with different abilities and different personalities. So it is harder to do the sort of randomized controlled trials that you can do in science much more easily. Nevertheless, there's increasing amounts of evidence about how to teach and retrieval practice, and how to teach reading, and how to teach maths in a very step-by-step approach that you did not see when I've been visiting schools since about 2003, when I joined the Education Select Committee, and then every Monday when I was a shadow schools minister, I visited schools up and down the country every single Monday. And the things you see today are very different from what you see in schools then. I just think I think the profession has taken control of itself. I used to talk in my speeches. I talk about the speech by Jim Callahan in 1976 called the Ruskin College speech, very famous speech at its time. It was about education, and he said in his speech, even before making the speech, he said, I was criticized for having for even daring to make a speech about education, because we were not allowed to debate education, the politicians, nor were teachers. It was for the education professors to determine what the profession would teach and how it would teach. That is no longer the case. That secret garden of education policy, not only have we taken the gate away, we've taken all the fences away, and into the garden are teachers. It is teachers now in this country, and that is unique probably in other countries in the world, that are in charge of their own profession. And so it is teachers who have developed, what do they call these overhead projectors methods? They developed this PowerPoint. They all come from within the profession, and that's why schools in England are doing so brilliantly well, and they're not doing so well, by the way, in Scotland and Wales. They are going down.
If possible, have we got 5 more minutes? Because we've probably got a few more things.
I mean, I know we've got
I'll come back.
So
I can come back another day.
How pressed are you? How pressed are you in the next 5 minutes? Have we got?
I'm fine.
All right, well, we've got a bit more time.
Well, I had a question I was just thinking, Nick, when you were saying...
These questions, by the way, have got a lot harder than the earlier ones. I like the earlier ones better.
So you go with this one in terms of teacher training. It was just when you were talking about teaching as a profession, in your mind, you have a sort of an idea of what optimal teacher training would look like. Is teacher training an apprenticeship, or is it better as a university course where you're learning more theoretical? Like, where do you see teaching? I know you said it's a profession. Is it a profession that you're better off learning on the job? Is it a profession you learn at university through the theories you've talked about? Do you have an idea? I know there was lots of debate about teacher training during the Conservative time. How do you see the sort of set teacher training ideas?
I think there's definitely a place for university. I mean, it's a graduate profession, so teachers come in with a degree, and then there's the postgraduate certificate of education, or there's a Bachelor of Education degree. And I think that all that's important. And what my criticism of the educational faculties was that they were not teaching teachers to be ready to do their job. They were learning a lot of theoretical stuff that had no resonance with what they were doing in the classroom. And so that's why we introduced the early career framework. It's 8 standards, all evidence-based, all signed off by the Education Endowment Foundation. We then took the same approach and we moved it upstream into initial teacher training. and that's called the core content framework. Again, the same principles to make sure that, you know, when you spend a year in an education department of a university, I mean, you get all the teaching practice. Of course, you go and spend time in different schools, but I think that what they're being taught in the educational faculties now, because of the core content framework, is much more geared to what they need in the classroom, like things like cognitive load theory, about classroom management and so on. So I think again, that's a relatively recent reform we introduced, and I wish we'd done it earlier. But I think now young people coming out of teacher training are much better equipped for the classroom than they had been. If you talk to head teachers now, I think they will tell you that. I mean, not universally. There's obviously going to be exceptions.
Yeah. Do you have any final questions, Tom?
Loads. I've got honestly, I've got so many. You mentioned PISA a lot. Do you trust PISA? Is that like the oracle for you in defining how good a country's education is?
It's not the only thing. I want to make sure that people come out of our education system educated and to the best of their ability, and then they're equipped to lead a really fulfilled life and to get a really good job afterwards. I mean, the education system is not about jobs, it's about educating people, but we want them to be able to participate in society and so on. So that's the goal. But PISA is a good indicator of whether you're achieving those things. And what we found in opposition was that the internal grades, our GCSE exam, A's and B's and C's were all going up every year. August time, everyone would cheer how the percentage of A's has gone up, percentage of C grades and above has gone up. And the same with the SATs in the primary, they were going up year after year. At the same time they were all going up, we were going down in PISA. And that's how we discovered that we had grade inflation in our system. So one of the things we did in Office is we changed the law to require Ofqual, the regulator, to eliminate grade inflation. So when I see the results coming out and they're the same proportion, I'm relieved that we have not got inflation anymore in our system. People say, does that mean that if every school was as good as Michaela in terms of Michaela this year got 100% of its children got a grade 4 at least in English and maths, 100%, compared with the national average of something like 65%. And so people know, it's on Twitter at the moment. If you go and have a look, there's a big debate about this. Doesn't that regulation prevent a situation where if every school was as good as Michaela, the regulations would make it so that 35% did not get top grades?
Nick, can I sort of say, listen, right? I've interviewed Catherine 3 times on here. Right? Yeah. I think she's a fantastically interesting person. I have a lot of admiration and respect for her in terms of everything she's done in her life. So let's just park that for a minute. Let's also park that there are fantastic teachers at a school like Michaela. Right? I mean, I know some of them. They're fantastic. I'm sure, I don't know all of them, but I'm sure they are absolutely fantastic. This isn't a comment on Michaela. This is a comment on the whole system of exams, accountability. I was talking to Adam Boxer actually about this the other week, talking about Progress A, talking about the accountability measures on schools. And, there was a report just last week out about the achievement of white disadvantaged students, a group that is continually underperforming. There are differences there with different groups. When you look at the performance of a particular group from particular backgrounds, they achieve really well, possibly because of the value in education of their families and the value they place in that education, the traditional way that they look at schooling. They want to work with the school. They want to work with, the head teacher. They want to listen to, they expect absolute excellence from their children. But those children, a lot of them are equal premium children, right? A lot of them are, actually at the far end of disadvantage. Also, you have lots of other more periphery issues like the size of the school, the size of cohort, the location of the school. All I'm saying is, you know, and again, this is not a comment on an individual school. This is a comment on the high stakes way that, in my opinion, we view school achievement, results. You know, we've said it so many times. They get fantastic results. Who gets the results? Why do they get the results? What are the context of the results that they get? That's not a comment on how good the teachers are. That's not a comment on how spectacular a school leader might be. But there are other schools where, let's just be honest about it, even in measures like Progress 8, they're at a massive disadvantage. They're in a huge school. They've got large groups of students who are completely disengaged and disenfranchised with learning, and they are being judged on the same yardstick as a school, let's say in an area of, you know, I don't know, central Manchester, I don't know, somewhere that's got a certain, you know, vibrancy about it. You know, you talk about these sort of coastal towns that have been left behind, right? There's a lot of issues there for me, as I've tried to outline a few of them there. And I don't know what you think of all that. But
I think, look, there's no question that different schools face different challenges, but I could take you to schools in the most challenging parts of the country that are getting absolutely stratospheric results. I could also take you to schools in leafy suburbs of Surrey, where there are no social problems, as far as I can tell, that are getting abysmal results. But
this is, again, though, can I just add another layer on?
Yeah.
Talking about exam results again.
I am, because they matter. They really matter to people. Both of you have got a string of qualifications attached to you, and they determine your life chances, and they do matter. And they matter at primary, not to the children. Those tests at primary don't affect the children's future, but they do help us identify schools that are not delivering. So they're really important, these tests. They are the second way of holding schools to account for the quality of the education. And just on I want to come back to the white working class children in a second, but just on the point I was making, why I mentioned Michaela, was obviously a trigger point for you, Tom. The reason I mentioned Michaela was that because they're the only school I've ever come across that has got 100% getting a grade 4 or above in English and maths. And those two qualifications are really important for people's life chances. They really do. They affect £80,000 more over a lifetime's earnings and so on. And but the point I was making is that there's a lot of debate on Twitter at the moment saying that even if every school was as good as Michaela in getting those grades at English and maths, the regulatory system of Ofqual makes it impossible, because they have to have 35% failing. Because of eliminating grade inflation. And I just want to say this, that is not the case. What happens is every year we do a national reference test. This is the same set of questions year after year, low stakes, sampled, no one really knows the results. And if those national reference tests show that our standards have gone up, then Ofqual will allow a higher proportion of top grades to be awarded at GCSE. So that means that actually, in theory, because it's a criterion-based approach, we could have a system where 100% of kids got A status, got grades 4 or above in GCSE English and Maths. So anyway, that's that. On white working class kids, again, this is I'm going back to what Bridget Phillipson said. She said that 19% of white working class kids, by which, by the way, there is no definition of white working class kids in the system. What she meant was white kids who are eligible for free school meals. In my view, that's a smaller set. A lot of working class people that don't qualify for free school meals. She said that only 19% achieved a level 5, a grade 5 or more in English and Maths, compared with the national figure, I can't remember, it's 40-something%. And she's right to be concerned. But this is not an issue of the exam system that's at fault. It is that we need to do more for those particular children. And again, there are schools, Mercia, Sheffield, that are getting level 4, grade 4 and grade 5 figures way above that figure. In fact, I think at Mercia, that's a school where the disadvantaged children, the physical middle children, outperform the non-disadvantaged in English and maths. But anyway, I think these are really important measures that help us identify A, good practice, and B, where we need to intervene and support schools that are underperforming.
Yeah. I mean, I've got so many more questions to follow up.
Well, I'll come back. I mean, I'm happy to come back.
I mean, my question would be, it was just when you mentioned stats, but I don't think we've really got time as well. But it was also about, I know you said, oh, it's just used by schools, but I know high schools in my local area that use the SATs to stream year 7 kids. Now, that you could argue that is affecting their life chances. I mean, you know, putting students into certain maths classes based on their SATs results. And then a kid who might have had a bad day ends up in a low class. I mean, I do sort of disagree that isn't having any effect on a child's life. You know,
but they might do it in another way. They might test them in year 7 at the beginning, and they might do badly on that test, and they end up in the wrong set. But these things are adjusted. They don't affect their life. As soon as it becomes clear to teachers that this child is in the wrong set, they'll be moved up to another set, and that's what happens. So, whereas a GCSE exam, that does affect the young person's sort of long-term life. I make this point because every year on the radio, you know, when the SATs come out or they're about to sit them, I get this thing about the pressure on young people. All I say is schools should not be putting pressure on young people to do well in the SATs. They should want to do well to please the teacher, but they shouldn't be, you know, put under undue pressure because it's not about, you know, these aren't qualifications that the children have.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm sort of done. I'm not done, but I think we could just talk.
Well, you had Catherine on 3 times, so if she can come on 3 times, so you can. There you go. So,
Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being so, you know, talkative and open and answering everything we've put to you and having a sort of really open discussion about it. Really appreciate it. And thank you for coming on Teachers Talk Radio. I'm sure Dave's enjoyed it as much as I have.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, thanks so much, Nick. I really appreciate it. I think by the fact that we've gone, you know, 20 to 25 minutes over, and we could have gone, I think, quite easily for another hour. You know, really says a lot. So I really appreciate it.
The listeners might start drifting away, I think, but if they haven't already. But thank you so much for having me on. It's been great meeting you both and chatting to you both.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, we've had 500 live viewers while we've been doing the show, so I'm sure there'll be others catching up afterwards. So thank you everybody who's joined in as well. I know there were comments which I haven't had a chance to read out from Mr. Simpson, from Naveen, from various other people anonymously who made comments. I'm really sorry we didn't have a chance to read them out. We've just had so much to get through. But thank you very much for engaging in the conversation tonight. And we'll be back again on TTR very soon, I think actually tomorrow with a show at 6 o'clock. So thank you, Nick, and good night, everybody. Have a lovely evening. If you're back at work, good luck. If you're back next week, even more good luck. See you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.